I read an analogy the other day that said, if somebody came up to you with a clipboard and said to you, what was your mother's maiden name, when's your birthday, there's absolutely no way you would hand that data over. Yet every day you fill those forms in and you give it away.
Yeah.
And you don't question why Nike needs that or why your gym needs that information. They don't need a lot of that private information, but we give it every minute.
You have the most robust time in our history in terms of data access, data accountability, data literacy, and just the amount of possibilities from every space, from marketing to finance to you name it, are endless.
10 years ago, we were trying to convince the world that data analytics could help you improve your business. Now I find myself sitting with the leadership team and with my teams going, hey, great, you have a metric, you have a set of analysis, but let's bring other data, like let's bring qualitative data into the equation to make it work.
Often you tend to focus in on data that tells you more the narrative that you're thinking that you want to tell, not necessarily the narrative that actually is true.
On Melissa first,
Lucky me.
Actually. I'd love to know, I mean, what most surprising or unexpected insight you've discovered from kind of analysing data within your current role at the moment, Melissa?
So no, I like the fact you give me the hardest question to start with. So we'll warm up the group with Mel, okay? Look, I think most data does surprise you, because if it doesn't, you've probably gone in with a bias to start with anyway. I'm a spreadsheet nerd from way back. Before data was cool, I was very into data. And so every time you go looking at data, things do surprise you. But what I think the most surprising piece isn't probably the piece of data, it's the interest from the organisation, the people, from the insight they can get from data. And that's the piece I've loved the most, because I think data is just data at the end of the day. It's what you do with it that gives the value of it. And so when you get people that get excited and they take a piece of data and they go, oh, this actually transforms how I was thinking about something, this changes what I'm going to do for my customers, I'm going to completely turn something on its head, that's when I think you get the gem out of data. Mm-hmm. So I've had a few moments of like that in my career, and it's been really nice to see. I always think if I'm surprised, it's probably gone wrong. I want my teams and my people to be surprised first, and delighted, hopefully, because then you're actually moving the dial forward through your organisation.
What about you, Sam? Have you had any moments like that?
Just thinking of quite tactical example. Our CRO team, conversion rate optimization digital team, they publish a newsletter and they conduct these experiments, and they in the newsletter they'll put the A test and the B test, and then the results are further down. So you sort of look at the two and try and predict which one you think's going to go, which one did better, and then, oh, really, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that, or maybe, oh yeah, that's obvious. But good little sort of tactical example of how those things play out.
And look, Calvin, being in the data space for the last few years at least, what has changed, do you think, in kind of 2023, 2024, that you really have had to shift your thinking and your mindset?
I think if you look back a little bit further, like before everyone had a data tool for everything, what most surprises me right now is just that everyone has access to data, and it's the onus has shifted from getting your data together, getting it clean, to actually going, hey, this is how you interpret your data, and this is the limit of what your data can tell you. I think the education piece is even more important now on the limits of what your data can actually tell your organization, and that's just as important as being able to tell you the metrics that you're measuring. I find myself in the complete opposite position where 10 years ago we were trying to convince the world that data analytics could help you improve your business. Now I find myself sitting with the leadership team and with my teams going, hey, great, you have a metric, you have a set of analysis, but let's bring other data, like let's bring qualitative data into the equation to make it work.
That's a really good point actually as well, but you mentioned access too, and I'd love to know, Andrew, being in the public sector, how do you balance access with privacy as well when it comes to obviously dealing with a lot of sensitive data?
So we have a separate data governance group, a separate privacy group, and a separate cybersecurity group to get a new data set, product, whatever, released into anywhere in the agency. Privacy needs to approve it on their own. Cybersecurity needs to approve it on their own, and they are separate. They do not report to other people who have an interest in that happening. And as a result, I would say our security is very strong. If anything, the onus is to protect privacy over everything. We don't have commercial concerns, so it's a little easier to make those distinctions. So in conclusion, I would say, much like with accounting and auditing, separation of authority is one way to go pretty successfully.
What do you think you've learned about data, especially when it comes to working in the public sector? What stories does it tell you within the public sector compared to, say, the private industry?
Well, Service New South Wales releases a lot of products to the public. They're just free. So it's not extremely different. It's more, I think, that there's a lot more demand for analytics in the private sector because you need to keep the business going healthily. In the public sector, you have a lot more diffuse masters. You need to make sure you're doing what the ministers think the government should be doing. You need to keep people safe, and you need to keep the products working reasonably well. But as a result, sometimes if the government says we need this to the public right now, you don't need analytics to back that up. You get it to the public, like we did during COVID or something. So sometimes it's easier, and because of stuff like that. But it can be harder because you can show people analytics, but if that doesn't comply with certain things, it's not like saving a bunch of money is nice. It's not necessarily going to convince everybody, I guess I would say.
Yeah, for sure. Now moving, I guess, to the private sector as well. Zeeshan, I know you've been in the industry for quite a few years, and especially in the marketing side of things. What do you think you've learned about data, especially in your new role, that you didn't kind of understand before?
I think, look, marketing, like any field's probably benefiting from the evolutions of data in the last few years, right? And one of the biggest evolutions that's happening right now is the increasing prominence put on privacy regulations. And I would say this about marketing. You collect a lot of information about your customers, you get a lot of details on how to personalize for them, but often you tend to focus in on data that tells you more the narrative that you're thinking that you want to tell, not necessarily the narrative that actually is true. And so I would say, as a marketer, the biggest thing we always have to focus on is making sure that first let the data tell the story, and then pick at that story to see, okay, well, how does that fit versus our initial hypotheses and whatnot? And obviously, with privacy and all these regulations coming up, being transparent, I mean, there's deprecation of third-party cookies, which is going to change the game in terms of how you can and what you can collect about your customers. Playing within those confines is going to be the single biggest thing for organizations in the next 3 years.
I see Sam kind of nodding away as well. I mean, how are you finding navigating the compliance space as well at the moment?
Yeah, it's a big topic, always important. I think it depends on the types of use cases you're looking at. Some, I guess, in the marketing space, there's obviously privacy critical. Then if we get into some of the, I guess, merchandising, pricing and so on, the compliance is very different. But from our point of view, it comes back to the setup of the team, and we also have quite a large governance team that sits off to the side with privacy as well, and they're not, ultimately they ladder to the same leaders at the top, but very different motivators and sort of check-off processes to make sure that we tick those boxes.
Certainly. And I know Melissa's in a space of her own as well with energy. How do you navigate that space really with the compliance in that area?
Yeah, I think it's really not that different to any other sector, really, in the sense that you've just got to make sure you're putting people's privacy at the core of everything you do. And I think that there's there's been a maturity in data. I think once upon a time everyone collected data for everything. In fact, you know, they almost asked our shoe sizes when they were putting through the submissions. And then you get to the point now that I think most organisations have matured. And for us, we've never really had to collect a lot of personal information because we're not the retailer. We're at the other end of the spectrum. We're providing the service, not the bill at the end of the day. So you don't collect data that you don't need to collect. And I think if you've got that in mind, and then making sure you've got all your security protocols in place and the governance protocols in place to make sure you keep what data you do collect absolutely secure and in the most robust possible way that you can, then I think you're in a good place. It's interesting. I think we give away our data quite loosely in this world, and I think people are awakening to that, and I think we've got a responsibility as organisations to make sure we do our duty on that side as well. But I think people also have to question how much data do they share. I read an analogy the other day that said if somebody came up to you with a clipboard and said to you, what was your mother's maiden name, when's your birthday, there's absolutely no way you would hand that data over. Yet every day you fill those forms in and you give it away.
Yeah.
And you don't question why Nike needs that or why your gym needs that information. They don't need a lot of that private information, but we give it every minute. So how sure are we that those companies are looking after our data? But I think from our side of the fence, we've got to be sure that we are.
And I think if some good has come out of the Optus and Medibank and various other sagas, it's the board recognition of the importance of this, and with that comes the funding to do something about it. And we've got quite extensive programs underway to delete old data that we don't need anymore. And we've found a lot of data that we just didn't know was there. So going through a rigorous process to delete it first and then set up systems so that it's not collected or at least deleted when it needs to be going forward is a good side of that situation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, speaking of board and communicating with the board, how are you guys after those recent kind of data breaches? How are you guys finding communicating with the board? Calvin, are you finding they're more receptive to hearing your thoughts?
I think being a digital native platform, it was always on the back of their minds. And after some of the earlier breaches in Australia, we found that the conversation just really shifted to, hey, how does these data points actually improve the customer journey? Like, do we really need it? And when they started asking those questions, it just made it easier for us to go, well, we can do X, Y, and Z, like data privacy by design, and we can embed these things within our culture. Definitely an easier conversation, but I would definitely say that the US experience, like when Equifax had the breach in the US, that really was the first wave that triggered that thinking. And I think it's just the Australian breaches just kind of pressed it home.
What about?
It's about privacy compliance by design, right? As opposed to being an afterthought. And at Foxtel Group, for example, that's one thing we've taken very seriously, like even having off-server storage of the customer data to make sure that things like that happened with Medibank or Optus don't happen to our customers. Because the truth is, between that, the advancements in AI, you can have a chatbot have a conversation with you, and within that conversation, how many personal identifying information have you shared that have just literally been separated as delineated data points that you can then use to target the customer? So I think the big ask at this point in the sector should be, what is the data that we're collecting for customer? How necessary is it? Do we absolutely need it or don't need it? And be very transparent to the customers that if we are going to communicate with you, these are the things that we are going to collect from you.
Yeah.
When you have transparency, you have trust, and that's the way to do business.
It's funny actually that Melissa said the clipboard analogy as well, because it's quite interesting. I reckon, if someone had come up to me these days, even to sign a petition and things like that, I don't really want to sign my name.
No.
It's such an interesting point, but yet we're happy to sign away our names online. So I think you make a great point there. But I'd love to kind of talk again about the public sector, Andrew, as well, and the storage of data within the public sector. I know it's definitely changed over the years as well, and how you actually store and how long you store people's data for. Where are you guys at in your journey at the moment?
So we have some hundreds or thousands of different databases, all locked down pretty heavily. But recently we have We have a group of people who like look through all the policies, federal, state, local, there's a lot of them. And basically they processed all of those policies and they said, look, we're gonna have to put in a disposal scheme. So we are going basically team by team and saying, all right, you got databases, here are the rules about when and where to destroy the data inside of it. It's been signed by the board. We now just need to see which parts of your data follow the rules, and then we delete it. And I'm basically leading a disposal team around the agency doing this. And if you are, like, I was a data scientist for like 12 years, just building models. And if you're from that, you don't ever want to get rid of anything. But so that, Australia has, I think, some of the most serious privacy laws in the world. And people demand it, so there it is, fine. So we may not be able to build something I thought about once, but people will be a little bit safer, and that's reasonable. I think, like, we were talking about breaches, and I remember Equifax, but like JP Morgan was hacked. It's the biggest bank in the world. Target was hacked. It's really, everybody's gonna get hacked. So it would be nice to feel as safe as possible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, how would you compare kind of the US privacy laws compared to Australia at the moment?
I'm trying to be diplomatic. They're less. Like, business comes first in America. And, Facebook and Google made everybody comfortable with giving away their data for 20 years.
Yeah. It's definitely been a shift in mindset, I think, as well, again, to back up Melissa's point there too. But where are you guys at in your own, when you think about data maturity in your personal lives? Have you got a certain level of data maturity in your personal lives? Because obviously that you guys are champions at doing it within your career and your personal lives. But do you think you're mature enough when it comes to your own personal data? Calvin?
Confession time.
I think I'm a bit more on the privacy conscious side, having worked in the early days of analytics and having done a lot of the data linkages between the ecosystems. I'm very much aware of where my data, whether it's identifiable or just linked, goes out to the world. My wife hates this because my own side of the family is all on like Signal and privacy conscious products, whereas I know the rest of the world is still very much on things like WhatsApp and Messenger and Instagram and things like that. I hope that our setup personally is quite mature, and we take steps to make sure that we don't release unnecessary information. Often to the detriment of like the broader acceptable social things like, hey, announce your anniversary and announce the birth of your child.
Yes.
And things like that.
I know you feel the need to want to put everything on social media, but should you? That's the question. I mean, Zeeshan, you were about to say
I was going to say, look, you have to ask yourself, right? I mean, like in your personal lives as well, that like I have, like when I go to a store and the first thing they're trying to do is put me on their rewards program and they're like, what's your email address? I've actually started asking, why do you need that? Why do you need this? And they're just like, look, man, I'm just trying to do my job.
Fill some boxes.
I'm just trying to sell you a t-shirt.
I'm just trying to sell you a t-shirt. I'm like, then sell me the t-shirt and send me something that I can read before I sign up for your rewards program, because I need to know what information I'm volunteering. I mean, we've seen that recently with the whole TikTok investigation. I mean, my good friend Chris Brinkworth at Civic Data, one of his analysts actually was the one who uncovered the amount of data that was being unearthed by TikTok. And I mean, to your point, Australia is quite far ahead in terms of being accountable and, launching an investigation into their activities and determining what happens. So it's one of those things, like you have to be conscious about what you do, like everything else.
Yeah, certainly.
Yes, I want to emphasize that I agree that people should be conscious, but if I think I were giving advice to anyone, I would say that what you should definitely be doing before you worry about how you handle your data personally is you should be going to your local MP, state or federal or both, and like just asking for more privacy stuff, because your bank will be hacked and your telecom will be hacked, and it won't matter what you did. Like I was a JP Morgan Chase customer when they were hacked. and I was a target customer, and everybody in America is on Equifax, and you can't control that.
Yeah.
So lobby your MP for whatever you can is what I would say if it matters that much to you.
Yeah, it's such a good point as well, because there really is, I think the Australian government is quite switched on to this, but they do need to hear it more. And if we all band together with that same message, it can really make a difference. I mean, I'd like to talk about the power of data quickly though, and kind of talk to Zeeshan about this quickly. What have you learnt over your career about the power of data as well? Because I know beginning in it, you didn't start in the data realm. So talk us through kind of what you've learnt.
Absolutely. Look, I started my career at the original search engine marketing firm when search advertising was in infancy. And as kind of 19 years have gone on and more and more platforms have come into market, the amount of data in which you learn what is being collected, it's staggering. I mean, and this is why you have the ability to personalize UX experiences at levels that you couldn't do previously. But what I do find with data is data has the power to change minds, guide direction for your organizations, but do it on the basis of something substantive, not just gut instinct. There's always a place for gut instinct. Don't get me wrong. I mean, some of the best business marketing campaigns have come on the basis of instinct, of what will work and not work. But when you have data validating that this is a good strategic direction, it forays much better for profitability and whatnot.
And Melissa, are you using data, I'm sure, for strategic decision making now within the kind of the C-suite and with your other executives as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we're focused, I guess, our use cases. So you've got kind of the data piece, but the piece that I get most excited about, and so does the business, is that analytics and insight piece. So what decisions can you make based off good data? Our whole sector's changing. The energy sector is going to be dramatically different within 10 years. And we can't forecast the future, but we can look at what's happening and the trends, and think about EVs, think about solar, think about batteries. We've got really good data that tells us what's happening. We've also got great international data that tells us where it's happening faster.
Yeah.
So you can start to see those trends, and you can start to see what that will look like, and then you can make really good business decisions about where you're going to go. Because you don't want to invest in the wrong things.
Yeah. I mean, on that, what is it telling you about the next 5 years?
It's going to dramatically change. Everybody should have an EV. Sign up. Look, it is changing. I think I get very passionate about the energy sector because I've never seen such a transformation in a sector in such a short period of time. But people are smarter, consumers are smarter, and they want to make sure they get the best value for their dollar, right? So people have been putting solar out in the Western Sydney in a way that no one even expected. The EVs are starting to gradually penetrate, but it's an infrastructure versus vehicle kind of moment, right? So the data is telling us that this is picking up and picking up fast, and people want to make sure it's a great investment. So our job in that is to make sure we invest in a way that supports those community decisions, so that we're supporting all the people in the sector, not just necessarily the people that can afford some of that great tech, but the entire customer base. To put the customer at the heart and look at what analytics, what insights can you get that will help them at the end of the day, and then you're making great decisions.
I think that talking about the power of data, so many examples in our organisation. We're pretty early on this journey, but like comms, marketing, personalisation, operations, distribution, people, team optimization, pricing, promote, the list goes on. It's actually fairly easy to get good technical outcomes. The challenge, I think, in many cases is flowing those through the business process and getting team members who are not familiar with data to understand it, to want to use it, to apply it in a way that makes sense. So there's so much opportunity, but it's more than just the data, I think.
I mean, you're kind of talking there a little bit about data literacy within the whole organisation. How important is it? I mean, what strategies are you using at the moment, Sam, to kind of get everyone up to scratch?
Data literacy is something we talk a lot about. Within our team, growing our capability as an analytics and data team, but also in the wider organisation at the board level. And I think we've had a big win with the recent evolution of Gen AI. And, as they say, the hottest new programming language is English, that we're putting analytics in the hands of everybody. And they're like, oh, wow, this is cool. ChatGPT wrote a speech for me, and whatever it might be. So there's a growing sense of demand, and we've got teams like our legal team, for example, can you come and teach us about this AI thing? So there's a real desire to want to do things, but there's an information gap that we need to fill. So we're working hard to try and build that so that we're proposing ideas, which is what we're doing now, but there's much more of a pull and making sure we're getting pulled in the right direction.
Speaking of AI, what is the appetite for AI at the moment, Calvin, within your organisation?
To understate it, it's like everyone wants it.
Yeah.
I've never seen such a great adoption of AI and AI-powered tools within our organisation. On one hand, it's freed up a lot of resourcing in terms of like what can be done without a dedicated DNA team. On the other hand, the other side is really just being able to balance the accuracy and the lineage and the right of use that comes from those Gen AI tools. I think English being the new programming language is the best tagline I've heard. And it just really illustrates that the true power of data, if you can come back to the previous question, is that it allows for a common language amongst the organization. Whether you're like ops or marketing, you understand the numbers and the metrics that will drive the organizational outcome. So I guess, especially for Airtasker, where we're quite young, the uptake has just been unstoppable.
Definitely. I think as well, it's interesting. I sat down with a bunch of CIOs as well, and they were talking about the AI piece, but they were also saying how important it is to have a certain level of data maturity to be even able to look at AI as an option. Zeeshan, where are you at with adoption of AI within the Foxtel Group?
So we've had a few different use cases, everything from just, pricing offers and an assortment of personalization engines. But I would say we're taking a much more cautious approach to full-on adoption. One of the most, plain use cases would be if we were to use AI bots to actually talk to our customers. Use them as a sales mechanism. But the reality is, you have to understand what that AI tool is capable of within a closed environment before you can break it out to the public. Because you don't know, what sort of prompts will trigger what sort of responses, and next thing you know, we have technology swearing at our customers, which, from what I recall, does not bode well for business.
So you'd rather you teach it, right?
Exactly. So
you'd rather test it internally, you're saying, than externally?
I would say, because of how ChatGPT and a lot of these AI platforms now can be housed within clean rooms, the best way is to run simulations within the organization using the clean rooms, test out almost with your call centers, see how, if you reach about 80-90%, good usability without any sort of issues, then roll it out to the public. As opposed to going, it's all about whether an organization's risk averse or they have a huge appetite for risk.
Andrew, I think you might have a slightly different opinion. I see you shaking your head slightly.
Oh, I didn't mean to shake my head.
How dare you?
No, we're also, we're cautious. We have a chatbot. It's one of the primary ways people engage with the agency, website, mobile app, live, phone, and chatbot. But I pretty much agree with everything Zeeshan said, because we need, it's not so much that we need to attract customers, but we need to reach a very broad base of people, including people that don't want to necessarily interact, because we're trying to bring free public services to everybody. And so we have a dedicated chatbot team. It gets a little bit smarter every day. Definitely good. That said, I think that within the agency, the biggest uses of this kind of technology are like everywhere else. Summarizing emails so you don't have to read long documents, starting a document so you can edit it instead of drafting it yourself. And one thing that people sure seem to like is summarizing meetings.
Oh, we love that.
Yeah.
It's all about the efficiency side of things as well, though. But it's interesting that we've mentioned chatbot a few times. I actually kind of agree with you there, Andrew, that when I need a quick answer to something, I actually just prefer to quickly talk to a chatbot and get that answer if it is accessible and if the resource exists then great. I would love to do that. And I don't always want to chat to a person, I think. I mean, how do you guys feel about talking to a chatbot, Calvin?
If I can't tell the difference, and half the time I can't, then why not, as long as it's accurate? And there's a lot of companies out there who are doing a hybrid model where the chatbots are accurate for the majority of things, but when it gets like to the hairy end and to all the edge cases, it flicks it over to a human. So I've seen a few of them where I distinctly remember someone, like the chatbot being very, very human and useful, and then became even more useful when I drill down to something really terrible. So CBA is like that. It's like, oh, I can't solve this. I'm going to send you to a human, and the human picks up the chat. So as long as it gets the job done, why I don't really mind if it's a human or a chat.
And Zeeshan, how do you find it? Have you got a chatbot function at the moment with Foxtel Group?
We do.
Yeah.
We do have a chatbot function, and going back to this, I think one of the things is AI in many ways, where it helps us in an organization is it's helping us do to your point, solve the menial tasks or do the menial tasks that humans were ill-suited to do in the first place. So yes, if it saves you resource, saves options, absolutely. It's the right way to go. And we do use like a hybrid chatbot / pass on to my human friend when things go wrong.
This is a question I actually asked the CIOs as well, was what do you tell your employees and your staff, though, that are worried about robots taking over their jobs? I mean, Melissa.
I talk about this every day, so I've been out on roadshows this week as well. The way I describe it is we've been getting more efficient as a society, and we've been through many industrial revolutions along the many hundreds of years that people have been working, and this is just the next one. And so it's coming for our IQ, not our EQ. And so, yes, it's going to do those menial tasks. It's going to do them better than we do, but we don't like doing them anyway. So it's a great thing to use technology to do those pieces of work because it frees us up to do the stuff that actually matters and the stuff that adds value. And I think it's not coming for your job, it's just coming for the stuff that we didn't like doing anyway. And it will create capacity that you've never actually experienced before, and then it's your choice of how we use that and how we optimise that across an organisation.
Building on the theme before of compliance, one thing we're starting using LLM, large language model, for is to navigate our compliance registry. We've got policy after policy, and as a general team member, it's hard to keep up with that stuff and read them and abide by them. So, if you've got just a chatbot, I'm doing this, which policy applies and what do I need to do? That's something that's, takes a horrible part of people's jobs out, makes life easy. It's not, ticks all the boxes.
And even in training, because we're seeing the same sort of concept, right? There's stuff that we do that we may not remember how to do because we did it 20 years ago. The ability for people to digest through training manuals and policies and procedures to say, how do I do this task? You don't want to pull out. And I still remember I used to have these reams of paper in my boot because somebody wanted to make a point that this is the type of stuff you want us to remember. And it was manuals and manuals in my boot. And now literally you can type in, how do I do this task? And it will tell you, give you pictures and possibly a video of how you actually do it. So it keeps people safer and more efficient as well as actually giving the information in a way that's digestible and quick.
Yeah.
And as for AI taking over jobs, look, the day we can start being able to describe what we want very clearly is the day AI will take over. So I think that's a long way away.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible tool that everyone's very mindful of the application of, though. Now, we did talk a little bit just before we jumped onto the session about what COVID did to kind of change our working models as well. And I know Sam's been working in a kind of a bit of a hybrid model at the moment. How do you kind of manage teams over a hybrid situation, hybrid setup?
Yeah, big question. Ultimately, collaboration is essential. So collaboration in a digital world is different to collaboration in a physical world. Ideally, at least from my perspective, there's a mix of both of those things. I was saying earlier, our very flexible workplace, work from home, work from anywhere, essentially, is a really strong employee competitive advantage for us. It helps with our retention, our acquisition of team members. But it means we need to work harder on the collaboration side of things, both in terms of setting up processes and forums and infrastructure digitally, but also setting up physical events for people to come and spend time face to face as well. But I don't think we've got the silver bullet yet.
Yeah. What's it like in the public sector at the moment, Andrew?
There's a large part of Service New South Wales that needs to be at the service centres and the phone centres every day. They just do that. Within the digital realm, where a lot of the engineers and the data people are, it's 99% work from home. I go to the office a couple times a month when there's like a thing. And it is, again, an advantage in recruiting people. People like it. It's also, I think when it comes to, I'm going to speak for the digital side because I know more about that. I don't have a lot of direct customer service experience myself. But when you're dealing with people building sophisticated data and tech systems, generally these are people who want to do big stuff. They want to build interesting things, and they are pretty high functioning and motivated. So in my experience, I don't need to babysit those people, mostly. They will perform. You just need to keep just pointing them in the right direction. And I don't worry about people like doing odd things during the day if they're at home, because, if they deliver, they deliver.
Exactly. How do you find the right people though, Andrew? It sounds like you've got a really great team underneath you that you work with. How do you find, we're dealing with a bit of a talent shortage within the tech industry. How are you finding the right people for the roles and those people that are motivated?
So first of all, I think you should expect everybody's going to leave after 2 years. They don't necessarily, but there's a lot of, when I was a data scientist, I would hear from recruiters every week. So I'm going to assume everybody else is in 2 years. How do you keep people? A combination of stimulating work and good conditions. And that's really kind of banal, but I don't think you can do much better than that, because the market is out there calling them. And with any luck, I will have provided a stimulating environment where they grew and they delivered for the agency really well. I realize I haven't given any advice at all. My advice, honestly, is that, and this is going to sound really obscure, but I used to work at a place and we had no success hiring data scientists. And I said, we need to look at new social science PhDs and new natural science PhDs coming right out of university who have no job prospects and have no idea how valuable they are. And we hired 10 in 1 year. And that was in America. It might be slightly different here, but these people come out with tons of skills and no one is telling them how great they are. So there's a plug.
Yeah, definitely. Calvin, how do you find being in a relatively newish business? How do you find finding the right talent, finding the right people to work with?
I think similarly, it's to provide, firstly, a great challenging problem and a friendly workplace that works for them. For me personally, I think the next big thing, and including for myself, is just having a meaningful conversation about the progression and how they can grow within the organization. You can have the same style of challenging problems day in, day out, but at some point, you're going to wake up and go, well, what have I done in the last 2-3 years? For us at Airtasker, we make it really clear when we go out and hire about the role, about the possibilities of the role, and then we also be really explicit around the growth opportunities. I do sincerely believe that teams can stay together longer if they all share and understand each other's goals and motivations, and they align with the business. I think one of my old teams stayed with me for 5 years, and I was the first one to go. But I think it is possible as long as the organization recognizes that personal growth is inherent within any job, rather than just going, well, you do this job and you do it for 5 years.
I think what I loved hearing from Melissa as well before we were chatting was that the CEO now sits within the office with everyone else. I think that's fantastic. And you're the same as well. You don't sit in your own separate office or anything.
No.
You sit with everyone else.
No, so we made a deliberate call. We had the privilege of moving new offices and setting ourselves up post-COVID, so we knew what flexible arrangements would look like for us. I'm very glad, because if I'd done that 2 years ago, I would have built 100% of desks, right? So a very different type of environment. But when we did that, we thought, well, what's the culture we want to create? What's the environment we want people to walk into when they do come into the office? And what does that feel like? And we're like, well, we're not hierarchical. We want everyone to feel committed and connected to the purpose of what we're doing. And we want people to be able to have those great hallway conversations. Otherwise, you can get everything else online, right? So the online meetings are great. The hallway conversations are why we come into the office, the connections. And so for us, we made a deliberate call, no CEO office and no exec offices. My CEO, we do like to make jokes, he's still walking around trying to find his office, but he was the one that was very deliberate in that I do not want an office. In fact, it was very much his intention. And so I think people are still surprised when he sits down next to them.
Yeah.
And so he's made a few people a little bit uncomfortable along the way, but they've got used to it now. We're nearly a year in. And now he could sit in the call centre one day, he could be sitting in our system ops. And I'm the same, I move around the business on any given day.
Are you finding people are a bit more open to the idea of actually now approaching him and actually going up to him and asking him a question in person rather than putting it in the email?
Absolutely, yes. And you also have to be conscious of that, by the way. So I used to think, I could go from one meeting to another and you'd have, you get there on time. I never get to meetings on time anymore because of the hallway conversations, you're almost too approachable. But it's great because I love it. So you just got to plan for that, right? And
totally.
And he's the same. People come up and talk to him and it's just a different day, but you connect with your people. And I think that's what, for me, is a big part of the joy that I get out of my jobs.
Yeah. Look, and guys, as we start to kind of wrap up the session today, I'd love to ask you all, and if you all want to kind of chime in about the future of the role of the CDO. And I did ask you a little bit to predict the future, Melissa, in regards to the energy sector, but I'd love to talk about the role of the CDO itself and where you see that going within the next 5 years. I'm going to pick on you first, Zeeshan, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Have you got any thoughts on where we're going to be as a CDO in 5-10 years?
Look, as a CDO, you probably have a uniquely incredible work prospect ahead. You have the most robust time in our history in terms of data access, data accountability, data literacy, and just the amount of possibilities from every space, from marketing to finance to you name it, are endless. I think what you need to do as a CDO in this industry is you have to enable those different functions to very well embrace that data ideology throughout the organization. It's no longer just, a data department's job to understand data and be literate on it. It's everybody's job to be a data storyteller, to be able to use data to get their points across. And I think in many ways, the CDO's role is no longer just about the data function. It's about the literacy and enhancing the literacy of data in an organization. And navigating what can be a very, it's like an endless buffet. Like you have so many options of what you can do with data and the platforms and the tech and what you can use. His job or her job is going to be to direct what platforms solve what purpose, as opposed to just pick a platform just because it's big and shiny.
Certainly. And Andrew, you've got a unique perspective, obviously being a former data scientist as well. Where do you see the role of the CDO in 5 years?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of it is about being able to talk about what you can do for the business to the other C people, especially the CEO. And this is difficult for a lot of people in the data industry. There is a real tendency to talk about how you will do something instead of why you will do it. And like the non-technical people do not really care about the how at all. But no, we're gonna do this project because you'll get this. And just explaining it that way, so showing why you're there, what you're gonna enable, because people don't understand, and it's not even necessarily their fault. It's like they've been sort of conditioned to think that this stuff is too hard for them, but it's not really. It's just like, here's what, you have fancy models over here, but we're not gonna talk about those in like a board meeting. No, here's what we can deliver. And just communicating what you can deliver that's of value just over and over again, I would say.
Definitely communication. I mean, Sam, you've got our final word of the day.
Just building on that, I think being able to communicate that value in commercial terms, I think, is, and that's a journey we're going on, where historically we're a big team of a couple of hundred people in data analytics and just doing stuff across the business. And the board are sitting, or the exec are sitting there looking at the cost of those 200 people, moving to a place where we're tangibly measuring the return on that investment, and that team becomes a profit centre, and then you get a seat at the table and it opens up more opportunities and, you know, ultimately leads to more exciting work for the team, and it's just a big journey. So being able to talk to value in commercial terms.
Exciting times ahead. Look, thank you to each and every one of you for joining us today for this, I guess, really insightful CDO Studios discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.